What a treat. Thank you so much. This morning's reading is a familiar story, I'm sure, to most of you. I could tell the story, but I would like you to hear it in the words that are used in the Old Testament, at least the New Revised Standard Version of the Old Testament. I'm not going to go back to King James or earlier. From the book of Genesis, chapters 6 and 7. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Then the Lord said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came on the earth. And on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The flood continued for 40 days on the earth. And the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark. From the book of Genesis, we will take maybe a novel look at that story in just a few moments. I was inspired this week. I was inspired, as strange as this might sound, by an ex-con who was served time for armed robbery. I was inspired by an ex-con who was served time for armed robbery who is now working toward his bachelor's degree. His name is Quaris Carter, and I want to tell you his story, and perhaps it'll inspire you too. So Quaris Carter grew up in the 5th Ward in Houston, a notorious part of town. And it was during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic in the 1980s when he was young. By the age of 12, Quaris was dealing, following in the footsteps of older kids in the neighborhood. And then when he got to be high school age, something kind of clicked in him and he stopped. He stopped dealing drugs and he focused on school, and he got his high school diploma. And then he enrolled in community college. And he was doing all right, but he didn't have much of a support system, and he had no money. And so he had some friends who said they could help him out. These friends were making lots of money. They were robbing jewelry stores with automatic weapons. It was easy money, and Quares was tempted, and so he joined them. Quares would get between $10,000 and $15,000 for a small duffel bag full of jewelry. He said it was easy money. They would case a jewelry store. It opened at 9. They'd go in at 9:02 and be gone by 9:05. As I said, they had automatic weapons. But Quares had a strict rule that he would never actually shoot anybody. So he didn't feel all that bad about what he was doing. Well, of course, Quares and his buddies eventually were arrested, and Quares went to prison for a 3-year term. After he got out, he tried to go straight. He worked for a time as an electrician, but pretty soon he returned to a life of crime. And he was caught again in another jewelry store heist, and this time he was sentenced to 6 years in jail. While he was in jail this second time around, he came across a copy of Nelson Mandela's book, The Long Walk to Freedom, in the prison library. And he said this book changed his life. He thought to himself, if Mandela could be in prison for 27 years and not give up, then he, Quares, wouldn't give up on his own life either. So when he got out of prison the second time, Quares was determined not to return to his old lifestyle. So he packed all of his belongings, which he was able to do in a single trash bag, and bought a one-way bus ticket to Wilmington, Delaware. He lived in Wilmington for a time, but he was homeless and he couldn't find work. One day, he happened to see a flyer for a recovery house in Philadelphia. So he moved to Philadelphia and he started attending a regular meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. The saving message of this 12-step program inspired Quares. He learned that other people cared about him. He said, "They told me that they were going to love me until I loved myself." Through Narcotics Anonymous, he met a counselor who saw something in Quares that he didn't see in himself, and this counselor urged him to give community college another try. At CCP, the Community College of Philadelphia, Quares worked hard and he made it into the honors program, and this enabled him to take classes at the University of Pennsylvania. Quares graduated from CCP just this past spring, and now he's taking classes at LaSalle towards his bachelor's degree. He's getting by, just barely, with a part-time job at the Free Library of Philadelphia. He still lives in a boarding house in a rough part of Philadelphia, but now he dreams of buying his own house where his daughter could come and visit him. That is Quares Carter's story to date. It's not exactly a rags to riches story, at least not yet. But the reason this story inspires me is that it shows us the power that we all have within us, the power to reinvent ourselves, to turn our backs on old destructive patterns, to move from the darkness in our lives into the light. The story of Noah and the flood, I think, shows us this too, so bear with me. First, I have a few remarks about this story of Noah and the flood that you heard in the reading. When I was first old enough to really understand what happened in that story, it made me very, very uncomfortable and more than a little scared and very angry. Once I shifted my childlike focus away from Noah and the ark and the animals, because when you're a kid, you love that story about the ark and the animals and the dove, all of that. But once I started to think about the God in this story and how he decided to wipe out every living thing on the planet, I found myself hating that God. This particular Bible story is one of the stories that led me to question and eventually to abandon the God of my upbringing, of my childhood. Because apparently God could wipe us all out anytime, just on a whim. And that didn't seem like the kind of God I could believe in. Perhaps some of you had a similar reaction when you thought about this story. But here's what I want you to do. I'm going to ask you just for a moment to put aside any anger or disillusionment you have about God in the Noah story. And let's look at what's happening in that story. Let's maybe try to bring God down to our own human level. God is unhappy with his creation. Things on planet Earth haven't quite worked out as he had planned. He's unhappy with all the tribal warfare, the immoral behavior, the way his whole creation has drifted toward chaos. Earlier in chapter 6 of the book of Genesis, we read that the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. Pretty judgmental God, too. But I think, if we think about our own lives, we can relate to God here. How many times in our own lives have we started down a path with the best of intentions, only to have our plans thwarted or to be disappointed in the outcome? Maybe we ended up in a dreadful dead-end job. Perhaps our marriage wasn't the storybook fairy tale that we had hoped it would be. Maybe, like Quares, we had friends who led us down the wrong path. Perhaps we struggle with addiction of one kind or another. I think we know all too well how God is feeling in this story when life doesn't turn out like we had planned. In the story, of course, we know what happens. God takes matters into his own hands. He basically says, I am going to start over. Let's wipe the slate clean. And that's what he does with the flood. The flood is God's great cosmic do-over. Oh, how satisfying that would be if we could do that, wouldn't it? Wouldn't we all love to have the chance to start over again? To take what we know now and go back to all the poor choices we've made and choose again, but with the wisdom that we've gained from experience. I see a few people nodding. Or maybe like God, we could pick and choose the things that have gone right in our lives the way he chose Noah and Noah's family. We could pick those things that have gone right in our lives, preserve them, and build on them. Just the way he did with Noah, saying, go forth and procreate. Yes, we might see this God as a vengeful monster for destroying everything on the planet, but still, I think in our human experience, we can relate to what he did. Unfortunately, we mere mortals don't get a do-over. We can't rewind history, and we can't ever start with a clean slate. And that's where Quares Carter's story comes in. Quares didn't ask for a do-over. He didn't look for a clean slate. All he wanted was a fresh start. Quares, who could have become just another statistic, another African American youth stuck in the school-to-prison pipeline, or worse yet, another African American youth dead on the streets of our city. He broke out of the pattern. He broke out of the cycle. He renewed and reinvented himself. It didn't take a flood for Quares Carter to turn his life around. And it doesn't take a flood, some kind of cosmic do-over, for us to do the same. Quares shows us that renewal is possible. And if we look at what Quares has done, we can learn how to get there ourselves. The first thing I notice about Quares' story is how he made up his mind. He set his intention. He set his intention. He was inspired by Nelson Mandela's book to commit himself to changing the course of his life. Now, we all know that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? But what we often forget, or maybe we're never told, is that that's not a one-way street. It's not a one-way street, because good intentions can get us out of the particular hell, the particular despair that we're in. We need to set our intention to make a change. And that is the first step to heading in that new direction. The second lesson that I take away from Quarles Carter is that we've got to change the things we can and let go of the things that we can't. We spend so much time grinding our gears over things that aren't under our control, wishing that we were born to different parents, that we didn't have that addiction gene, that others would treat us better. We spend so much time thinking about these things that we use up all our energy that we have, and we stay stuck in our old patterns and practices. When he got out of prison the second time, Quarles didn't fret over the fact that he was dealing crack when he was 12. He didn't wish that he had grown up in a better neighborhood or that he'd had friends who hadn't led him astray. He knew he couldn't change any of that. And he knew that there was something that he could do, something that he could change, something that he had control of. So what did he do? He got out of Houston. And he left behind the friends and the environment that were holding him back. To renew or reinvent ourselves, we've got to accept our past as our past. Let go of the things that we can't change and change the things that we can. To renew or reinvent ourselves, we've got to get out of whatever Houstons are holding us back. Finally, and I believe this is vitally important, we've got to find someone who believes in us. A person who can help guide us, someone who can challenge us, and someone to whom we can be accountable. Quarles found his 12-step group and the counselor who took him under his wing and steered him towards college. It's not impossible. It's not impossible to walk this road all by ourselves, but it is pretty darn difficult to do this on our own. We need others to help and support us. We need to find a mentor or a guide to walk this path. It might be an individual. It might be a community. It might be this community. Perhaps your being here today is a step towards your own renewal. Some might say that it was divine providence that Quarles found that flyer that brought him to Philadelphia and that Narcotics Anonymous meeting where he found his mentor. Others might see it as just fate or dumb luck. We might pray for someone to show up on our doorstep like Clarence, the guardian angel in It's a Wonderful Life. We could do that. And we might also take active steps to find a mentor or a guide or a counselor like Quarles's. Someone to point us in the right direction and help to keep us on the path. As I say, perhaps becoming part of this community is a step on that path for some of you. But the point is that the journey of renewal, the task of reinventing ourselves, is a whole lot smoother and more enjoyable even when there's someone walking with us, someone who can be both our cheerleader and our challenger. Thankfully, and we should give thanks, that most of us here haven't faced the struggles that Quarles Carter has in his lifetime. Yet I'm willing to bet that there are many of us who are in need of changing something in our lives, some part of our lives or ourselves that isn't working out the way we had planned or had hoped. We don't need a flood to set the stage for our own redemption. We don't need the slate wiped clean. We can set our intention. We can change what we can change and let go of the rest. We can find an ally, a mentor, a guide. May we all find the renewal and rebirth that we seek. This day and every day, I wish you peace. Amen.